Hey folks, in this video we're going to be looking at how to do crazy cheap lip sync. So just something really fast just to fill in the space, something where in a project that doesn't matter a whole lot, where you just need the audience not to really notice, or you're under a really tight deadline. For doing any real lip sync, this just won't function. It's worth noting that this requires a character with an abstracted mouth. So the more realistic characters aren't going to work for this. In this case, I'm using Boxhead, which is made by Jason Osipa for the purpose of teaching facial expression and facial rigging from his book, Stop Staring. So thanks, Jason. Ultimately, this is the mouth we're working with. It can go wide and narrow, and it can go up and down, and that's about it. It's actually surprisingly effective for what it is, but ultimately you can see, obviously, it's far from realistic. So you can't go too much more closer to realism than this before this just won't function. But again, if you're under a tight deadline, maybe it'll work for you. So what does this involve? Well, the key concepts are, and I apologize to the robot here that came with the PowerPoint slide I stole it from, but it kind of works, animation. So the key concepts we're looking at here are these, and these are actually really important and are important even if you're doing real lip sync, not just this abstracted one. So the first concept is, we already covered actually, the more abstracted the mouth, the better this particular system works. Sorry, the rest of these things are all important for any type of lip sync, good or bad. So the first concept is perhaps the most important, with this chop mouth versus mush mouth. And the idea here is that when you do lip sync, you don't want to go super fast. You don't want to try to hit every sound and every syllable. It'll end up looking like this, where the character's mouth is chopping away, and it's funny, but it's not believable. In an abstracted mouth like this, and it's supposed to be funny, maybe you can get away with it, but in general for lip sync, we're looking to kind of hit the big sounds and mush through the rest, hence mush mouth. And that ends up looking a little more smeary like this. It ends up looking more like talking. So you're smearing through sounds. And this represents from actual real lip sync that humans do, what we actually do, which is we kind of, our mouths kind of just morph between slower targets, while inside our tongue and our teeth are doing a lot of intricate movements to change the nature of the sound. But we don't really see that with mouths like this. So it's more about trying to get the feeling of the lips. The next concept is a really critical one, which is that any word that contains the letters M, B, and P that are pronounced, and I don't think there's words that have silent M, B, and P, but anytime you say M, B, and P, it requires that you close your mouth. You can try each one and feel it, M, B, P. You can also try it with your mouth open and see if you can do those sounds, and you'll find that you can't, ventriloquist aside. So ultimately, whenever we hear those sounds or see those letters, it's important that we close the mouth for at least 2 frames. Anything less than 2 won't actually read as a closed mouth shape. The mouth movements generally come before we hear the sound. So you can try this out yourself. Try saying the word mama, and you'll notice that your mouth has to close first before you can make the M sound. Most words are like this, where you have to form the shape of the word first with your mouth, and then you can say it. So that means, in general, we're going to see the animation before we hear the words associated with it, just by a frame or 2. Sometimes it can be perfectly in sync, but never after the fact. So the last concept here we want to keep in mind is that when we pause speaking or when we stop speaking, you want to hold your last mouth position for at least a little bit, at least a brief moment there. And the reason why is that if the mouth continues moving after you finish speaking, it looks like you're saying new words and immediately feels out of sync. You can try this again too. Say a phrase and then stop saying the phrase and see what your mouth does. It likely holds the last position you had. And then it can start moving again when you do something different. So those are our key concepts here. So what's this system that we're going to be applying? Again, this is beyond cheap, and it's not how you do lip sync. It just happens to work here. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using the sound wave file to dictate the major up and down motion of our mouth, noting that the up and down is going to be essentially equated with volume, and the overall kind of in and out pumping sound of the the waveform and of the sounds that we're hearing of the words. The side to side of the mouth is going to be equated with the sounds that we're going to be making. For example, E sounds are a wider mouth, and oo and o sounds are more narrow mouth. And we're going to dial that in as we go. So that's going to be our approach. Again, this is going to provide a quick lip sync that will not take a lot of time, and believable for an abstracted mouth. This really won't work for a much more high-level production or a more realistic mouth. That being said, because I've already said it, let's dive in. So I'm going to begin my first pass, thinking about the up and down motion of the mouth. Now, I should say before we do this, we do want to think about the position, the width of our character's mouth. Most characters, not just Boxhead here, are going to give you some options for how wide the mouth is. You don't want to go full width because then you can't go wider if you need to make a wider shape. And you don't want to go full narrow because then you can't get more narrow to get like a U or oo shape. So something in between that gives you some range to play with. Some people are going to have a more pursed lip feel. Some people are going to have a wider mouth feel. But just don't go to the full range. So for this guy, I'm going to keep it kind of somewhere in the middle, neutral, and make sure that this is kind of the average mouth shape size that I keep coming back to. Down here in the waveform, I'm going to expand this out and make this bigger just by grabbing the bar and pulling up. This will make it easier to see changes in the waveform. This is the clip I'm working with here.
I can understand you're very upset. Kittredge, you've never seen me very upset.
All right. So
I can understand you're very upset.
This first part here is someone else talking. So we're not going to actually click in the lip sync until right here. Did I do that on purpose? Yes, I did. So we'll just shrink this up here so we're just focused on the part we care about.
Kittredge, you've never seen me very upset.
So what we see here in the waveform in Maya, and to get the waveform in here or get the file in here, you literally just grab the file, drag and drop it in here, and it'll pop up as long as, double check, that under your animation preferences, you're at, let's see, under your settings, is that right? No, this is correct. Under your frame rate, you're at 24. And playback speed, you're at 24, or whatever frame speed you're picking, but make sure those actually match up. Also make sure that you're at 24 here. If any of those are at another speed or at play every frame, this won't play correctly. So what I'm seeing here, you can left click and drag through. We can hear the different waveforms. And we're just gonna go ahead and move the mouth up and down. As the waveform gets bigger, we'll make it go up. And as the waveform goes down, we'll make it go smaller. You're not going to be able to hit every little bit. So when I'm looking at just this waveform right here, it gets bigger, then smaller, then bigger, then smaller. But it does that over the course of just a few frames. That's going to be too tight. What we're just going to do here is open our mouth to here and then close it in here. And then we'll call it a day. Again, this is the mush mouth concept. We don't want to hit every part of the waveform. I'm going to go ahead and just do a pass as is. What this is going to do is give some kind of sense of sync between the voice and the movement of the jawline. That's what this is simulating. It won't necessarily be accurate. It will just give a visual cue that these things connect together. And if you're ever unsure of where to put it, the waveform doesn't line up, better off putting it on the frame before. Remember, the face moves before we hear sounds. Looks like I got a couple keys in here. I'm going to delete those. So I'm starting fresh. If the waveform is bigger, like this one, go ahead and go wide. You don't have to go full wide here. Just go wide for this character. So for this guy, probably like 20% wider. If the waveform is smaller like these, I'm not going to open the mouth quite as much. So we're going to kind of equate this to volume. Again, it's just more of a visual cue than an accurate cue. So I'm going to start here. Going to press S. If you want, you can put on the auto key as you go. In general, you don't want to put keys right next to each other. That's not going to give us a mushy feel. It's going to give us a choppy feel. So at least 3 frames between keys if possible. So here I'm going to open up to something wide. And here we go narrow. Then I can skip this one. I just can't get another change in there fast enough. So I'll just go ahead and move to wide here. It's not quite as wide as before, so I won't go quite as wide. So I'm going like every 2 to 3 frames here. That's fine. I'm just going to keep going. There's no set rule here. We're just trying to get that feeling of the movement to follow the waveform. I'm going to go ahead and finish this up, and we'll come back and take a look at what I've done. Actually, before I do that, I just want to point out here with this very, very next one, the waveform really doesn't line up well to where the keyframes are, and this is really common. So here, while it gets really wide here, I don't want to put frames right next to each other, so I just soften through this. Again, we're mushing, so it doesn't matter. Here, the waveform comes back in, but it doesn't line up well. I don't want to bring this back in one frame. I want to give a couple frames for it to move. So I'll cheat. I'll go a little bit later. It's okay. So here, and then again, I could go right back out, but it doesn't line up. So if you can cheat it towards earlier, good. But if it's putting frames right on top of each other, better to go ahead and space them out, even if it comes later than the actual movement. It's just part of the game. So, okay, I'm going to keep going on this. All right, just finished up. Literally probably took me 3 minutes, maybe not even that, just to go through. Again, notice none of the keystrokes here, or the keyframes, are right on top of each other. Everyone's at least 2 frames. If I can get more, I do more. Sometimes it's harder to do that. Once I've done that, though, I'm just going to go ahead and press play and see if it feels like it's connecting to the speech pattern here.
Kittredge, you never seen me very upset.
Not bad. It feels...
Kittredge, you never seen me very upset.
It feels a little bit consistent, like the mouth opening is about the same each time. You want a little variation in there, so maybe I'll go through for some of the bigger sounds.
Kittredge, you never seen me.
Like seen really hits hard.
You never seen me.
So this one's big, so maybe I can go a little bit bigger with that one. Although that being said, typically a E sound like seen would be less wide. Let's see if there's another place to do it.
Kittredge, you never seen. Kittredge, you...
The U actually would be nice to get a little bit more of a wider hit on it. Just that's my feeling for it. You can pull up a mirror, look at your face, see what your face is doing, but the thing here is don't overthink this one. We're trying to be quick and cheap, and the main thing is getting some variation there. It'll make it feel more believable.
Kittredge, you never seen me very upset.
Maybe upset. This last one here, I'm going to hit this one a little bit bigger too. Note that the bigger you go with your mouth, the more likely you're going to run into chop mouth, but you'll see it where it starts to kind of jitter and chop and it doesn't feel as good.
Kittredge, you never seen me very upset.
Here, at the very upset part, he pumps a lot and the leathers doesn't look as good to me. I could reduce this by not closing the mouth as much, but the next thing we need to do here, and this is going to change this, is I need to go back through and listen for those MBP shapes, and whenever we hear those sounds, we're going to have to close the mouth for at least 2 frames. Again, usually before we hear the sound. Sometimes, though, with some shapes, you do need to actually make the mouth close shape towards the end for MBPs. It really depends on the situation. And if you're unsure, do it before. So let's listen to the words. Me. So here we have a me. And you can see if you watch this part, you really don't buy the me. The mouth never closes. So this is the word me here. What it means is right here, I got to get my mouth closed, and I got to get it closed for, remember, 2 frames. So I'm going to actually get it completely closed there. And that should give me a more believable me. That's better. And then for the last part here, we have the P in upset. So the up is right here. So this one's pretty easy. I just need to get the mouth fully closed here, which is for box head this. This one's tough. He really swallows the U in upset. Let's see how this sells, if it sells a little bit better.
Kittredge, you never seen me very upset.
Pretty good. Pretty good. Good enough for our crappy quick lip sync. So I'm going to call this pass done. Again, you could go back and refine it a bit. You could watch your mouth if you want to get a little bit tighter and try to get the actual motions. But the whole idea here is to blow through this and just create some sort of visual connection between what we're hearing and this character's mouth. For our second and final section, we're going to be working only with the left and right, the width function here. So this shape is what's going to round this out and keep it from feeling just like a trap jaw, fake mouth thing that we're getting here. This will add more nuance. It'll actually help us connect to some of the vowels and sounds and start to make the feeling of actual lip sync pretty convincingly. The first step here is actually to delete any of the keys that we have going this way along, in this case, the X direction. So I'm just going to go into my graph editor here, find the X direction, which should be just flat keys, nothing on it. And I'm going to delete them all. If you want, you can just select the curve and delete that instead. So now we just have complete control here. Now, because I'm going to be keying only the translate X here, and I don't want to rekey the translate Y, we specifically want these to work in different patterns from each other so that they're going to naturally overlap. This is to our advantage. I'm going to set this up so it only keys the attribute that I have selected. So to do this, we're going to set up a couple options. The first one is over here in the animation menu. Under key, I'm going to choose set key, which is normally just the S button, but it actually has a bunch of options associated with it. A lot of people don't know. So I'm going to click on these. Actually, I have no idea who knows these and don't. I didn't know them for the longest time, so I assume that means a lot of people don't. But may not be accurate at all. So here, these are the default settings, which I don't usually use, but I just set them back so you guys can see them. The thing I want to do is I want to click on, for set keys on, I want it to be on all keyable attributes. That means everything in the top box on your attribute editor, your channel box, will be keyable attributes as long as they're not locked. In this case, that's just translate X and translate Y. However, I want to go down to this bottom section and also change it to the hierarchy being selected is correct, but under channels, instead of being all keyable channels, I want it to be only what we've selected from the channel box. So now when I press S, if this is selected, it's only going to key translate X, and that's it. And that's what I want. I'm also going to, just to make my life a little bit easier, I'm going to right click on translate X. Actually, anything in here will do this. And I'm going to sync selection to graph editor. And actually, I never saw this before, sync timeline display as well. So you notice that right now, if I click on translate Y, we're seeing all the translate Y keys. But with that other switch turned on, now we're not seeing anything from translate X because we haven't set anything on it yet. So this allows us to isolate only the channels we care about. And in the graph editor, this is also helpful. In the graph editor, when I click on one or the other, it isolates that channel and only shows us that in the graph editor, which is also very convenient. So translate X alone. I'm going to do a quick test and just make sure it's correct. So I'm going to go out here where I know I don't have any keys on translate Y. And I'm going to select the X and press S. And make sure that didn't come over to the translate Y, and it did not. So that means it did actually work. So great. I don't actually need that key. It is starting out. Okay, so how does this work? How are we doing this? The basic idea, keeping the mush mouth concept in our heads, is that ultimately we're going to go through and scrub through and listen to the general sounds that we're hearing, the dominant sounds and the words that we're hearing, and try to make the mouth more or less move in those directions. This one works much better if you actually say the words yourself or look at the original reference and get a sense of the character moving their mouth in or out. You'll get a better feel for this, and you'll get a better result. But you could just fake it. You really can't use the waveform anymore, though. That doesn't work for this. This part is really based upon the sounds that we're hearing. I want to encourage you to remember that it's not the words and the way they're spelled that matters. It's just the way the sounds sound. The easiest way to kind of wrap your head around this is by looking at the classic Preston Blair breakdowns of the different sounds. These aren't my favorite drawings, but they're very clear about what's going on. I think there's issues with these, but that's not for this video. What I do want to show here is that different sounds have a different mouth width associated with them, and some of them even have movements associated with them. For example, if you make the sound ooh or you, it requires you actually move your lips in a certain direction to make that sound as a transition. Some sounds like ah, you just put your mouth in that shape and just make the sound and it's fine. It doesn't need a movement associated with it. For our cheap system, you can kind of disregard the movements and just go for the sounds. But if you want something a little bit more refined, if it's not quite connecting in the way that you like, adding those movements in there will help out. So the widest shape is E. So when you make an E sound, that's when your mouth is going to go wider. Keep in mind that you might see the letter E, but it's actually pronounced like eh, which ultimately means it's going to be more like this shape, kind of a medium width shape. This is more of our neutral shape. So E the widest, A little bit, A and the I. And again, it's a long I sound, not an I, although actually that would be more like E. So there's no hard, fast rule here. You kind of need to make the sounds yourself and hear them. So A, I is a medium shape. E, I is a wider shape. The OUWQ is sort of a progressively more narrow shape. So O usually requires the movement of the mouth to make the sound, but you can just put it in the shape and make it too. U is like the O but narrower and usually more projected. In this case, like a monkey. The WQ, W sounds and Qu sounds, ultimately are the narrower shapes with your mouth really, really pursed. MBP, this really depends. They show it really wide, but you can do a narrow M, a narrow B, a narrow P, depending on where you were before. And then most of the consonants are just kind of a medium width, somewhere around the AI, but there's really no hard, fast rule here. None of this stuff is hard, fast rule. If your character does have a tongue, which ours does not, when you do L, D, THs and th, any of the F sounds, like friend, folly, and V, those sounds require the F and V for you to actually touch your teeth to your bottom lip. So a mouth closed sound essentially, but with teeth showing, which we don't have here. And these are the tongue sounds where we want to see a momentary tongue flick in and out. So that can help you a little bit to sort of contextualize what these sounds should look like. But again, you can just say them yourself and sort of feel them out. Keep in mind the mushing, and you should be okay. So let's dive in. I start right around here. In general, if I hear a sound, having some sort of movement in and out will tend to make the sound feel more convincing and the lip shape's more convincing, but that's not a hard and fast rule. Sometimes just a little drop is totally fine. So I'm going to narrow this up so I can get a slightly more intimate sense of my waveforms. And this just basically involves you scrubbing through. You might want to do one word at a time or a couple words at a time. Don't just do one sound at a time. And just kind of think through what the sounds are. Thinking about the A, I, E, O, U sounds. And actually say them to yourself. Try to say them like the actor that we're hearing. In this case, Tom Cruise. And see what your lips actually do. And between those, make some decisions. Again, we're going to we're looking for kind of overall big movements. So when I make the sounds, Kittredge, you've never seen me upset. Kittredge, you've. What I get is the Kittredge is more of a drop, Kittredge, so more of a straight drop. But when he says dridge, at least for me, my lips come in a little bit, a little more narrow. So I'll pull in narrow there. And then the big one here is you've. And you've, if you remember that OU, that drive there, is going to be starting wide and then coming narrow. So that will be really convincing if I can nail that one. Let's try it. So I'm going to start right here. Just going to key it. Again, when I translate X as selected, I'm just going to press S to key it at the beginning. It has the K, the little wide sound. So I'm just going to, just for fun, I'm just going to widen it just a little bit. Something that sort of stopped working on me. Let's see what's going on. So I do not know what this bug is, but I did figure out a solution. And so I don't want to waste a lot of time in this. You probably won't run into this. I've never had this before. But if you do, this is a potential fix for you. So what happened is, it already is happening. Once I set a key, or even again before, if I'm using these settings, I'm not sure if the settings are the issue or not, you can see that this control's locked off and no longer functions. If I go ahead and just set any other keyframe here and have at least 2 keys, it's working again, and now everything functions normally. I don't know why. I don't know why that's a fix, but it is, so I'm going to run with it. So hopefully you don't have that issue, but if you do, try this out. See if that works for you. Set a couple keys and move on with your life. So I'm going to keep this a little more narrow. Not that narrow. So for kit dridge, I just want the dridge to be a little bit tighter. Did I actually not key it? I didn't key it. All right, so a little bit wider. Now, as he prepares for the Uve, Kittredge Uve, I'm going to go just a little bit wider just to kind of anticipate it. And as he goes to the Uve, I want the mouth to be nice and open for the Uve part, but it should be narrowing up a little bit for more of an O shape. People like that. They'll connect with it. And then I'm just going to go to the end of Uve and narrow that up, because ultimately that's going to get that sense of that that movement that we get for U. So you can see how that comes in there. It connects immediately with the voice. I'm just going to keep going with this. I'll do a little bit more, and then I'll stop and just kind of finish it out and show you what I get. So you've never, when I say the never, for me, I open back up a little wider. I could use the auto key, by the way. In fact, I will. I'll go ahead and do that. I'm a little nervous. So scene is a big one, and scene is a full kind of wider mouth shape. So I want to be kind of building to that, mushing my way there. So never seen. So I want to start off a little bit more narrow here. I'll just come in a little bit, and then make sure on the scene part, when it gets to the E, oh, it's all the way out here. I'm going to work towards a wider shape. Now that to me is probably too far out for this scene. Never seen. I'm going to keep the mouth narrow until right before he does the wide shape. And then for the me, I'll come back in a little bit. Back to more of his neutral shape. So let's just see what that looks like so far.
Kittredge, you never seen me.
You can see already that we're connecting pretty well with it.
Kittredge, you never seen me.
Again, partly because it's abstracted. The more it's abstracted from reality, the more forgiveness we're going to have. But just with one pass, that's already working quite well. I'm going to go ahead and finish it out, show you what I get, and we'll talk through the last little bit there. So zooming out, it looks kind of like this at the moment.
Kittredge, you never seen me. Very upset.
That's enough that probably most people will just not pay attention to the mouth, and then I can spend the rest of the time doing my expressions. But what I usually will end up doing, if it's my own piece, I'll go back and look for things that really feel like a disconnect and touch them up a little bit. So just watching it, give myself a little bit of self-critique here.
Kittredge, you never seen me. Very upset.
The upset at the end seems kind of come out of nowhere, and partly it's because his mouth is a little bit too wide, so it's actually a mouth open issue in my mind for the set.
Kittredge, you...
Feels like a little too wide at the beginning too. Maybe I'll narrow that up.
Kittredge, you never seen me. Very upset. Kittredge, you never seen me. Very upset.
But the rest of it's feeling pretty good. What you'll notice here is that when you do the things that look really good here are when your mouth changes shape towards the beginning of the sound. Will tend to connect with your audience really well, and then ultimately any change from wide to narrow is going to start to make it feel like there's some sort of deliberate thing happening here between this character's brain and their mouth. So any variation is going to be good, rather than just keeping it straight up and down the whole time. But obviously there's certain sounds you want to connect with that are going to be more obviously narrow or wide, and those you want to make sure you hit. Kind of like the MBPs, you got to hit those. So I'm going to do one more pass, clean it up, and then we'll take one last look. So I just went through and just touched it up. Part of what I did too, there are the parts that I identified that really disconnected from me, but I just went through and scrubbed through each part and just watched the lips, and the places where the lips felt like they disconnected from me, I just changed it. Maybe in some places, like when he said seen, before his mouth was really open, which didn't really kind of fit. It's more of a kind of a wider shape. And so I did that instead, even though before I had that, I just adjusted it and changed it. So again, your first pass is a rough one. Do one refined pass. It'll definitely perk up. Also at the end, I forgot to mention, it animated at the very end. Like it animated back to this sort of open shape. And it looked weird, or maybe it was a closed shape. Either way, it was moving at the end. And it didn't really fit. So I just left a little bit of open mouth to sort of maintain that last position. And then held it, just like we talked about in the rules at the beginning. So the final look looks like this.
Kittredge, you've never seen me very upset.
And for, aside from the issues I ran into, honestly, that whole thing, if I wasn't talking through it, probably would have taken me, maybe 10 minutes at the most, probably closer to like 7 minutes, something like that. So very fast, very quick. And in general, with lip sync, if you get it close enough, the audience just won't notice. They won't be looking there. If your audience is watching the lips, it's probably because you did something wrong. So that is quick, cheap lip sync. Hopefully that helps you guys out. Best of luck in your performances.